Hello, my name is Jordan Giustiniani, and tonight I am with Devin O'Rourke, Tom Stramka, John Murphy, and Evan Sheehan. Tonight we will be going over The Boys on the Boat by Daniel James Brown. We will be discussing two main questions that pertain to a majority of the book. The first being how George Pocock and Al Ulbrichtson each stand as somewhat mythic figures in The Boys in the Boat. However, they were very different men with very different relationships to the boys. We have to discuss their differences in leadership styles and the roles within the University of Washington's rowing establishment. We need to talk about how Pocock enabled him and connected with Joe Rance on such a personal level. Well, personally, I feel that George, as a boatmaker and mentor to all the boys on the team, personally favored to Joe himself, and while he was always passionate and respectful of all the boys on the team, he was especially delicate around Joe because of losing a family member earlier. Al, I feel, was one of the best coaches in Washington University, despite losing to many other teams. He, as a person, decided to focus on the whole team's welfare and their studying and exercise instead of just focusing on one person. While these are both very different relationships to have, I feel like for Pocock, it was better to deal with just Joe, while Al Ulbrichtson was definitely supposed to be more focused on the team as in general. Later on in the book, it is noted that all along Joe Rance had figured that he was the weak link in the crew, but he found out much later in life that all the other boys felt the exact same way. Why do you think that was? And why do you suppose they didn't reveal this to each other until they were old men? Who would you categorize of the weakest and who would you categorize of the strongest, and why? Personally, all the boys in the boat thought they were the weakest link, and the reason they didn't reveal this to anyone was because they didn't want to seem a burden to everyone else on the team. While in hindsight, none of the boys on the team were the weakest link, as all the boys brought something different to the team, which helped the team get farther along. And the reason they waited so long to tell each other was because that if they had mentioned this earlier in life, perhaps they would have thought that the team would have considered kicking them off or giving them less time to shine, which in hindsight is definitely something that happens a lot in different sports. I don't personally believe that there's any weakest or strongest links in the team, as everyone brought something different to the table. Everyone brought something that could have helped get the team farther along. So personally, I believe that while each member definitely wasn't the best or the worst, they definitely brought something to make the team as a whole great. Now on to Evan.
My name is Evan, and I'm responding for the two questions asked of me. George Pocock and Al Ulbrichtson were both specifically important men within the story in their own way. While George was an almost legendary boatmaker and mentor to the boys, Al was one of the best coaches in Washington University, although facing defeat from rival teams. Both of these men interacted with the rowing establishment and the boys in their own way, giving support in the needed areas. George, for instance, was a passionate man that treated the boys and as well as Joe Rance not only with respect, but support when Joe himself was faced with his own personal pains and anxieties. Coach Al, though, focuses on the altogether welfare of the team by making sure that they not only excel in rowing, but as in the student through focus on grades and exercise. This reveals how each of these men fill the roles that are needed to be filled in order to aid the young men they had to support. Now for the second question. It reminds us as to how not only did Joe think of himself as the weak link of the team, but each member thought of themselves as well. The question asks us as to why we thought only when the boys were older that they revealed their thoughts to themselves. It is my opinion that they chose to do this because of the simple fact of age and life experience. As they grew old, they learned that even though they had their weak points, they as well had their strengths, not to mention the fact that as fellow team members, they should have trusted each other as well.
In regards to question 1, both men had very different leadership styles. One was a legendary boat maker, while the other one was a very well-respected coach. Even though he had lost several times, he was still respected for his teaching styles. George Pocock treated all the boys fairly, in a sense, but treated Joe with more careness and kindness because Joe had lost someone in his family, and that's hard for a child. Well, Al cared about the whole team as a person. He cared about the wellness of the whole team for the whole team because he knew in order to win, he needs the whole team as one. I believe Joe thought he was the weakest link because everyone has their own inner thoughts and expressions about themselves. He believed he was the weakest link because he didn't want to blame any of his friends for doing a bad job. And he didn't tell them till later on in life because when you're older, you can laugh about things that happened in the past. All the boys thought they were the weakest link because you don't want to blame your friends for something that goes wrong. In regards to who the strongest and who the weakest link is, they're all the strongest and weakest link. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So they all have the same strength and weaknesses.
My name is Devin, and this is question number 1. George Pocock was a boat builder, the boys' coach, was nice, and had a rough beginning as a child. He treated Joe with much more respect and care because of what happened in his early life. Al Ulbrichtson was also a coach, but didn't really care to be nice to Joe, like George, when it came to training the boys to win against very competitive rowing teams from different universities and ultimately the Olympics. Both of the boys' coaches had leadership skills, but it came down to how friendly they were able and to bond/form a relationship with them as well. George Pocock was able to connect with Joe Rance on such a personal level because both of them had several similarities. These similarities included rough beginnings when both of these people were being raised. Another similarity was that Al Ulbrichtson and Joe Rance did what they loved and had passion towards what they were doing. The passion in doing something you love empowers you and motivates you to go beyond your expectations and say, hey, I can do better than this, and to never stop striving to be better. This connection between Al and Joe Rance has had such an impact in things like motivation and grit. Question number 2. I think they felt this way and decided to mention it later on in life because they might have sounded like a disappointment or might have been kicked off the team as a result of possibly slacking. I also think that by the weak link, the boys meant that because the people in the front were rowing as fast as they couldn't look back in the middle of a race, and so they had to keep giving it their best, fast, precise rows, so they were in sync with the team and not slowing them down. The same goes for the middle and the back of the boat, since everyone gave it their best, hard rows in order to achieve their goal of winning the race.
My name is Tommy, and I'm responding to the 2 questions about the book. George Pocock and Al Ulbrichtson were both important figures in the book. While they both played important roles in the story, they were very different from each other. George Pocock was very passionate and gave the boys respect and encouragement. Coach Al, on the other hand, didn't care for treating the boys right, but rather cared about winning. Both coaches treated Joe differently. Coach George was easy on Joe because he knew what he had been through, while Coach Al cared more about the success of the team. Question 2. Joe always considered himself to be the weakest link of the team. Later in life, Joe found out that the team felt the same way. I think that this was revealed later in life because they knew the team was only as strong as the weakest link. I think that Joe was the weakest and the strongest at the same time because although he was not as physically strong as the others, he had the mental toughness after what he had endured throughout his whole life.